The call came on a Wednesday at 6:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had just set my coffee on the windowsill of my apartment in Portland, watching the rain come off the Willamette, and my phone lit up with Mom's name. I almost didn't answer. I had a site inspection at 9. A mixed-use development in the Pearl District that had been consuming my life for 11 months. I was tired. I was behind on sleep. I answered anyway. "We need you to come to Sacramento this weekend," she said. No hello. No how are you. Just the flat, managerial tone she reserved for announcements she had already decided on. "Your father and I have made a decision about Rosalind's." Rosalind's was my restaurant. Not the family's restaurant. Not a shared asset. I had named it after my grandmother. I had signed the lease on the Midtown Sacramento space 6 years ago at the age of 28, with $34,000 of my own savings and a second job doing drafting work on weekends to cover the build-out. I had designed the interior myself. Exposed brick, warm Edison lighting, a bar made from reclaimed Douglas fir I sourced from a demolition site in Folsom. I had chosen every supplier, every menu item, every staff member. For 3 years before I moved to Portland for my architecture firm, I had run the front of house personally 4 nights a week. "What kind of decision?" I asked. "Daniela needs a project," my mother said. "She's been struggling. You know how she's been." I did know. Daniela was 32, 2 years older than me. She had spent the last decade cycling through ventures. A boutique clothing resale app that folded, a wellness studio in Elk Grove that closed after 8 months. A brief period where she was going to become a real estate investor and which ended when she lost $22,000 on a failed flip. Each time my parents absorbed the loss. Each time they called it an investment in her potential. "I want you to transfer Rosalind's to her," my mother said. "Temporarily. While you're in Portland. The lease is in my name, Mom. Names can be changed." Pause. "We've already talked to Daniela. She's excited." I looked at the rain on the window. A city bus moved slowly through the reflection. "I'll come down Saturday," I said. I didn't say yes. She didn't notice the difference. I need to tell you about the year I was 23 because that year is the foundation of everything that followed. I graduated from the University of Oregon with a degree in architecture and $41,000 in student debt that I had accrued entirely on my own. My parents had paid for Daniela's undergraduate degree at UC Davis in full, $87,000 over 4 years. Including her apartment and a used Audi they called a graduation gift. When I asked at 17 whether there was money set aside for me, my mother had said, "You're so capable, Nora. You'll figure it out." I had written that sentence down in a journal I still have. I've looked at it maybe 100 times since. After graduation I worked 2 jobs. Junior drafting work at a small firm in Eugene and weekend shifts at a restaurant called Thurston Table, where I learned more about the hospitality business than I ever expected to. The head chef there, a woman named Guadalupe Reyes, taught me how a kitchen actually runs. She taught me food cost ratios, supplier negotiation, how to read a table's energy and adjust service tempo accordingly. I was not there to become a restaurateur. I was there to pay rent. But something about the work stayed with me. At 25 I moved to Sacramento to take a position at a mid-size firm called Palladian West. The work was solid, if unglamorous. Mostly commercial interiors and permit drawing. But Sacramento's Midtown neighborhood was changing fast and I had eyes. I noticed a 1,400 square foot ground floor space on our street that had been dark for 2 years. The building was 1920s brick, good bones, terrible history of tenant turnover because the previous landlord had been difficult. The new owner, a property investment group called Meridian Holdings, had just taken over the building and was hungry to fill the space. I spent 3 months running numbers before I approached them. I calculated the build-out at $28,000 if I did most of the design and project managed the contractors myself. I had $34,000 saved. I negotiated a lease with a base rent of $3,200 per month and a 5-year term with 2 5-year renewal options. Favorable terms because I came in with a fully drawn concept, a business plan with 12 months of projected cash flow, and the architectural drawings already done. Meridian's leasing agent told me later it was the most prepared first meeting she'd ever had with an independent restaurateur. I told my parents about Rosalind's when it was already open. I invited them to the soft opening on a Thursday night in March. The space was warm and full. Guadalupe had connected me with a sous chef named Marcus Webb who had worked under two James Beard nominees and wanted his own room to experiment. The menu was California Italian, unpretentious and precise. My mother walked in, looked at the bar I'd built, looked at the menu and said, "This is nice. How long do you think it'll last?" Daniela didn't come. She was in Scottsdale that week for a friend's bachelorette trip. Rosalind's lasted. In year 2 it turned a profit of $67,000. In year 3 it was written up in Sacramento Magazine and Eater. I was managing it remotely from Portland by then with Marcus as head chef and a general manager named Priya Acharya who I trusted completely. The restaurant had become something real. Something mine. And then my mother called on a Wednesday morning and told me Daniela needed a project. I drove down to Sacramento on Saturday. My parents' house in Carmichael smelled like the same fabric softener it had always smelled like. Something synthetic and floral that I associated with childhood chores and being handed a list of tasks while Daniela watched television. My father, Gerald, was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea, looking like a man who had already decided to stay out of whatever was about to happen. Daniela was at the kitchen table with her laptop open and what appeared to be mood board printouts spread across the surface. "I'm thinking of calling it Danny's," she said before I had sat down. I looked at the printouts. She had already redesigned the interior in her head. The reclaimed wood bar I had spent 4 weekends building was marked with a sticky note that said "Remove." The Edison bulbs were circled in red pen with the word "dated" written next to them. "Your business is outdated," she said not unkindly. "I'm taking this space for my concept. Something elevated. Something that actually fits what Midtown is becoming." "She has a vision," my mother said from the doorway. "Mom and Dad agreed," Daniela said. "We just need your signature." My father looked at his tea. "What exactly are you asking me to sign?" I said. My mother placed a folder on the table. Inside was a 1-page document. A business transfer agreement, drafted by someone who was not a lawyer, transferring operational control of Rosalind's restaurant to Daniela Voss. It referenced the business entity but made no mention of the underlying lease. It had been printed on standard paper and notarized by a notary whose stamp I recognized as the one at my parents' bank branch. "Sometimes you have to destroy the old to make way for the beautiful," Daniela said. She was looking at her mood board, not at me. "You were just a placeholder here, Nora. You know that, right? You kept the seat warm until someone with a real vision could take it." I looked at the document. I looked at the bar in my mind. The grain of the Douglas fir, the smell of the first Saturday service, Guadalupe standing in the kitchen doorway giving me a thumbs up. "Sign the transfer," my mother said, "or I'll tell everyone you abandoned the family business. That you walked away and left Daniela to deal with it." "Hey," I said. I picked up the pen. "Okay," I said again. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I read the document one more time slowly and I signed my name where they indicated and handed the folder back to my mother. Then I drove 40 minutes south to my apartment in East Sacramento, which I still kept for Portland trips home, and I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and I started reading. What I already knew, and what the transfer document they had handed me did not address, was this. The lease for the R Street space was a direct lease between Nora Voss and Meridian Holdings LLC. It was not attached to the business entity. It was not mentioned anywhere in the document I had just signed. The business transfer my mother had drafted transferred the name, the equipment, the social media accounts, and the goodwill. It did not, could not, and did not purport to transfer the lease. That required a separate assignment process, Meridian's written consent, a credit review of the incoming tenant, and a formal lease assignment agreement. I had not initiated any of that process. I called my attorney the next morning. His name is David Okonkwo, and he had drafted the original lease with Meridian 6 years ago. I had kept him on retainer for the restaurant ever since. $200 a month, the single best financial decision I ever made. "Tell me what they signed," he said. I read him the transfer document over the phone. There was a pause. "Nora," he said. "They transferred a business. They don't have the lease." "I know. They're operating in a space they have no legal right to occupy." "I know. That makes every dollar of revenue they generate in that space potentially recoverable," I said. "And every modification they make to the premises. Their liability," he said. "Not yours. Theirs." I wrote one word in my notebook. Good. I went back to Portland and I watched. Daniela documented everything on Instagram. This I had not anticipated, but it was the greatest gift she could have given me. Over the following 2 weeks she posted 41 stories and 9 feed posts showing the renovation in progress. She posted the reclaimed wood bar being disassembled. She posted the Edison bulbs in a trash bag. She posted a video of herself spray painting the name Danny's on the front window, captioned, "Out with the old clinking glasses, grand opening in 2 weeks." She had hired unlicensed contractors. I could tell from the photos. No safety signage, no permit postings visible in any frame, electrical work being done without conduit covers. I sent screenshots to David. He sent them to a building code specialist named Renata Flores, who confirmed what I suspected. The renovation work being documented publicly showed multiple California building code violations, including unpermitted electrical modifications and the removal of a load-bearing partition that had been part of the original permitted build-out. Rosalind's had been built to code. Every permit had been pulled, every inspection passed. I had been an architect. It had never occurred to me to cut corners on my own building. What Daniela had just spent 2 weeks documenting in full color with location tags and timestamps was unpermitted construction on a commercial space she did not have a lease for, in a building owned by Meridian Holdings, who had not been informed that any of this was happening. On a Tuesday night from my apartment in Portland, I filed an anonymous complaint with the Sacramento Department of Community Development. I attached 12 screenshots. I noted the address, the nature of the work, and the absence of visible permits. I noted the load-bearing wall. Then I called Priya. "How are the staff?" I asked. Confused, she said. "Marcus left last week. 3 servers are looking for other jobs. Tell them to hold on 2 more weeks," I said. "I'll explain everything soon." The grand opening of Danny's was scheduled for a Friday night. Daniela had promoted it for 10 days, on Instagram, on a newly created TikTok account, in a local lifestyle blog that had run a soft feature on her vision for reinventing Sacramento's dining scene. She had 2,200 followers watching her stories by opening day. She had booked a DJ. She had ordered custom cocktail napkins printed with her face. She had, according to her stories, spent $18,000 on the renovation, though given the unlicensed labor and the shortcuts visible in her photos, I suspected much of that was furniture and aesthetics rather than structural work. I drove down from Portland on Thursday and checked into a hotel 2 blocks from our street under my own name. I arrived at the restaurant at 7:15 Friday evening. The street outside was warm and loud. Sacramento in October has a particular quality of light, amber and horizontal, that I had always loved. The front window had been repainted. The Douglas fir bar I had built was gone. In its place was a white marble slab on painted metal legs that looked expensive and somehow worse. The Edison bulbs had been replaced with recessed cold white lighting that made everything look like a dental office. Daniela was at the host stand in a red dress, phone in hand, already live on Instagram. 200 people milled around the space. Glasses clinked. The DJ played something I didn't recognize. My mother was at the bar. She saw me and looked briefly startled. "You came," she said. "I wouldn't miss it," I said. I ordered a glass of the house Cabernet and found a corner near the back wall. The wine was fine. The room was full. Daniela was mid-story on her phone, sweeping the camera across the crowd, laughing. "This is mine now," she said to her followers. "This is everything I've been working toward." I looked at my watch. At 7:41 p.m. the front door opened and 2 people walked in. A man in a hard hat carrying a clipboard and a woman in a city-issued vest. The man had Sacramento Dept. of Community Development printed on the back of his jacket. The music did not stop immediately. It took about 45 seconds, which felt much longer. The inspector, his name was Carlos Mendez I learned later, walked to the center of the room and asked, in a voice calibrated for exactly this kind of space, for the permit documentation for the renovation work. Daniela lowered her phone. "What?" she said. "I need to see the pulled permits for the structural and electrical modifications in this space," Carlos said. "We received a complaint 2 weeks ago and we've been trying to reach the permit holder." "I'm the owner," Daniela said. "Can I see the lease?" he said. David was already at the restaurant by 8 o'clock. He had driven up from his office in Roseville and he was wearing a suit on a Friday night because David Okonkwo is that kind of attorney. He carried a leather portfolio that contained, among other things, a certified copy of the original lease between Nora Voss and Meridian Holdings, the lease renewal executed 18 months ago, a letter from Meridian Holdings confirming that no lease assignment had ever been requested or approved, and a 2-page legal memorandum summarizing the liability exposure created by the transfer document my family had drafted and I had signed. He also carried a certified copy of a document that no one in my family had thought to look for. A clause in the original business transfer agreement, the one they had written, the one they had notarized, which contained, buried in paragraph 7, a liability assumption clause. It was standard boilerplate language that the person who drafted the document had copied without reading carefully. It stated that the transferee assumed full responsibility for all obligations, liabilities, and regulatory compliance associated with the operation of the business at the listed address. They had written it themselves. They had handed it to me. I had signed it and handed it back. That clause meant that Daniela had, in writing, assumed personal liability for every code violation in that space. David introduced himself to Carlos Mendez and presented the lease documentation. Carlos reviewed it, made a phone call, and came back with a placard that he affixed to the front door. Red border. The words unsafe, do not occupy. Daniela's live stream was still running. Her followers watched the placard go up. This is not real, Daniela said. She turned to my mother, who had gone pale. Tell him this is not real. My mother looked at David. Then she looked at me. Nora, she said. What did you do? I signed the papers you gave me, I said. That's all. David opened his portfolio on the host stand and laid out the documents in a row. He walked my mother through the lease assignment issue first. Simple, clean, 30 seconds. Then he turned to the liability assumption clause. He read paragraph 7 aloud in the voice of a man who has been paid to read things aloud in difficult rooms. The DJ had packed up. Half the guest had left. Daniela's phone was still in her hand, but the screen had gone dark. You set a trap, my mother said. You handed me a document, I said. I read it. You were supposed to let her have this. Mom, I said. The lease was always in my name. The whole time. The Sacramento Department of Community Development issued a stop work order and a notice of violation the following Monday. The violations included unpermitted electrical modification, removal of a load-bearing partition without engineering review, and operating a commercial food service space without a valid certificate of occupancy following the renovation work. The total remediation estimate came in at $31,000. Because of the liability assumption clause in the transfer document, that $31,000 was Daniela's responsibility. Daniela's business insurance, a policy she had purchased for $1,200 that covered general liability, denied the claim. The policy contained a standard exclusion for unpermitted construction work. Meridian Holdings, upon learning that their space had been modified without consent or permits, issued a formal breach of lease notice. Because I was still the leaseholder, I received the notice and promptly forwarded it to David, who responded with documentation showing that the modifications had been made by an unauthorized party. Meridian was satisfied with the response and agreed to work with me to restore the space. My father called me 3 times that week. I let the calls go to voicemail. The restoration cost $28,500, which I absorbed because I wanted the space back and because I could. I rehired Marcus Webb and 3 of the servers who had waited. Priya came back as GM. We reopened Rosalind 6 weeks later with the original name, new permits, and a bar I had built again from salvaged Oregon white oak I drove down in a rented pickup. Daniela's renovation had cost her $18,000 in contractor fees and $31,000 in remediation. Her parents covered most of it. I didn't ask how. The night Rosalind's reopened, I stayed until close. I drove back to my hotel on our street at 1:15 in the morning with the windows down, Sacramento's October air finally cooling toward something that felt like autumn. The street was quiet. The restaurant's front window was dark, but the new sign, hand-lettered in the same font I had used 6 years ago, caught the streetlight in a way I liked. I parked. I sat for a moment with the engine off. My phone showed one new text from Daniela. It had arrived 2 hours earlier, while I was watching the last table linger over dessert. It said, "I hope you're happy." I looked at it for a long time. I typed 2 words. I am. Then I blocked her number and drove back to my hotel. Have you ever had to be the bad guy in someone else's story just to protect what you built? Tell me in the comments. I want to know how far this one travels.